A year ago, I made a video where I was painting and talking about how creating had always been the most important thing for me. Back then, I really didn't care much about art supplies. I just grabbed whatever I had and start painting. Then I started noticing that some artists were making these amazing pieces, and part of it wasn't just their skill, but also the tools they were using. So very slowly I started upgrading my own paints. For example, I switched from my old Pentel watercolors to a small set of white knights. Nothing that fancy, but I could actually feel the difference. Still, I didn't dwell too much on whether it was the best choice or the best product out there. It felt like a natural transition. The amazing part was the ritual itself. I still remember the day I went to buy them. Everything that day felt meaningful. In that same old video, I also mentioned that a few years later, when art channels and supplies reviews became very popular, I got influenced. I began buying more and more things. I think I kept it within reason. I just really wanted to find new tools that might help my process and allow my art to develop. But the more I had, the more lost I felt. I didn't know what to use anymore. Sometimes I would freeze over my palette, not knowing what the color composition for my new piece should look like. Or I'd made swatches that looked great on paper, but once applied to an actual piece, they didn't perform well, even though they were high-end watercolors. And there was something about time management that just didn't work. I wasn't making enough art, the kind of art I never used to struggle with, and that led me to my no-buy-year decision. And that's what this video is about, but not only that. It's also about influence, limits, whether shopping actually helps creativity, how this whole cycle affects our community, and the products I didn't fall for this year. Anyway, hi, I'm Aneta. I'm an artist and illustrator, and online I go by Rampant Hair. Welcome to this talking head video. I'll try to include some visuals, but if you're listening in the background, that's perfectly fine. Let's start with a small summary of my no-buy year. Two things really changed. The first one was that I simply stopped going to my favorite Italian art supply shop online. Before, I'd spend evenings scrolling, adding things to wish lists, comparing pigments, imagining how I'd use them. And looking back, maybe I subconsciously felt that if I just got a certain product, I'd magically become better, or maybe not magically, but improved by default. I knew that shop stock by heart. I'd even got weirdly annoyed when my friends bought art supplies without asking for my opinion first, because spending all the time browsing and watching YouTube reviews basically made me an expert, didn't it? And whenever someone did ask me for advice, it felt validating. The second big change was YouTube. I stopped watching product reviews and unboxings. Those videos are satisfying, no denying it. The dopamine hit came not just from buying things, but also from watching other people buy things. And it was fun, like a small community event, seeing all those satisfying colors, hearing people share their opinions. I especially loved creators with very specific color palettes. My favorite was Natasha Newton. She really made me fall in love with earthy, muted tones. So, was all that time wasted? No. I learned things. But that was really just the tip of the iceberg, because the deeper you look, the more you realize how quickly even the art community can become toxic around stuff. And suddenly the most important thing, creating, becomes a side effect rather than the main character. Now, those who know me know that I can be a bit heavy-handed in my opinions. I'm very much a tough love type. So just remember, these are opinions and a very general view of the art community. I'm not going against anyone specifically. I just made a sort of mashup character that could serve this video. Let's start with product testing. Did I ever try product testing on my own channel? Yes. Am I proud of those videos? Well, partially yes. I did some honest reviews. I genuinely wanted to try those products and share that little dopamine buzz with others. But if I'm being honest, there are a few videos I definitely do differently today. Some of them are just boring as fuck. But that's a whole different story, more about experimenting and testing YouTube waters than anything else. There was one video in particular that actually did quite well, and I'm really grateful for that. I remember being genuinely excited about the conversations happening in the comments, exchanging opinions with other artists. That part was wonderful. But at the same time, it also made me a bit sad because it showed me that that kind of content, product testing, reviews, showing what you accumulated was what performed best on YouTube. When my no-buy year ended, I couldn't bring myself to keep making those videos. I wasn't excited and I didn't have that many new products to show anyway. And this brings me to something important. There's actually very little art in the obsession of owning art supplies. Nowadays, everything gets turned into content, right? For many YouTubers, art hauls are their livelihood, and from a certain angle, that's fine. Buying new materials can also be comforting and fun. I get that. But here's the problem. That excitement, even if it's genuine, can easily snowball. You buy more to feel that spark again, to stay relevant, to have something new to show. It's fun, yes, but it's not healthy in the long run. Because no matter how much someone talks about how important art is to them, in many of these videos the product becomes the main character, and people end up spending more time preparing to make art than actually making it. Let's talk about swatching. Swatching is useful, everyone should do it, but there's the endless swatching, the giant collections, the sketchbook filled with hundreds of tests, and I sometimes wonder, is that paint ever being used again for actual art? I remember I was painting a sky with the Roman Szmal Przybysz Grey, and someone commented, I never realized that paint was so blue. And I remember thinking, yeah, that makes sense. If you don't have that color yourself and you only ever get to watch people obsess over it in swatching videos, you never actually see how it behaves in a real painting. You can't really judge a color unless you use it. And especially with this granulating or color separating paints, they're not easy to handle. You have very little control over them. You need to practice. That's the only way to truly understand them. Swatching feels productive, but it's not the same thing as painting. Buying because other people buy, because if everyone's talking about it, it must be good, right? And if it's all over the internet, it must be true. Okay, I'll admit it. I'm a tiny bit bitter about trends in this field, or maybe just bitter in general. I remember when it all started. I think it was around 2020. Someone somewhere bought a himigwashi set and painted a Studio Ghibli scene. And suddenly the internet exploded with almost identical pieces, and overnight everyone owned himigwashi. And honestly, from a marketing perspective, I've got to give them credit. They knew exactly what they were doing. The paints came in those pastel palettes, the colors were shuffled into a non-rainbow order, and each cup was sealed like a tiny yogurt pot. And video after video after video, everyone was reviewing them. Even I got caught myself thinking, maybe I should get them too. I went back and rewatched some of those channels later, and sure, there are still himigwashi fans out there. honestly, more power to you guys. They're not life fast, so I think they're perfectly fine for sketchbook experiments, or maybe if you're a beginner. Here's the thing, this isn't really the kind of palette you can just set aside when you're not into the mood to paint. To get the most out of it, you basically have to make it your daily companion or not buy it at all. People were having mold issues like crazy, and it's the kind of setup that ideally needs to stay wet all the time. With regular gouache, drying isn't a big deal. You just reactivate it with water and move on. But with this palette, I saw people spending entire days trying to clean it up and restore it to its former pastel colored glory. So I'm not saying you can't enjoy them, of course you can, but this whole situation was such a perfect example of how fast a trend can spread, how something blows up, gets praised everywhere, and then, well, almost disappears. And honestly, I'm glad I didn't fall for it, because knowing my process now, I would have absolutely no use for that palette. The watercolor community. Now, despite me being more on the mixed media side, I love watercolors, and there's a very strong community of pure watercolorists on YouTube. They're the worst. No, I'm kidding, kind of. After watching all those perfectly curated videos, I caught myself apologizing for having a messy watercolor palette, which is ridiculous. Why are we even apologizing for that? Your palette is supposed to be messy as fuck. That's proof you actually use it. Watercolors aren't meant to live their whole life in swatch form. The more you scrape the bottom of that pan, the better, because it means you're painting, not just collecting. But that's not really what I see online. Watercolors have picked up this sort of prestige vibe, which I find quite bizarre. Suddenly a lot of people treat them like collectibles, and sure, there might be an interesting limited edition palette that in a few years will be worth more, and occasionally there's nothing wrong with treating yourself, but collecting every shade of every color imaginable, trust me, I tried to be understanding about it, I really did, but at some point I had to step back and realize it just wasn't for me. Live and let live, your money, your choices, but I'm off that train. Some people spend ages hunting down the perfect studio setup, the ideal palette, the ideal colors, the ideal everything, and then when they finally sit down to paint, the results are, well, let's just say they're usually beginner level. Now, I need to stress this before you accuse me of being a snob. I have nothing but encouragement for beginners. I still remember how it felt when you knew exactly what to paint. You could see it clearly in your head, but your hand just wouldn't do what you wanted. I still get that feeling even now after years of practice. What I hate is seeing beginners fighting in those communities because one person feels superior to another just because they own a more expensive range of supplies. I mean, come on. Or because they watch endless YouTube reviews and suddenly think they know better without actually putting hours into making art. Jealousy is definitely a thing in the art community. We are in a very competitive job market, and sadly, because art isn't math, there are no fixed rules. It's very easy to fall into this endless cycle of arguing about who deserves what. But when you're a beginner, and if you're already facing that kind of attitude, it can be really crushing in the long run, especially coming from someone who's a self-proclaimed expert. And speaking of rules in the art world, I don't consider myself the best artist out there. Even if one day I reach what I consider my dream level, there will always be someone better. However, and this is my very personal opinion, I feel like the overall level of skill here on YouTube has dropped quite a bit. Nowadays, as soon as someone touches a brush, they talk about their art like they're already a fully established artist. And I'm not talking about hobbies out there, I mean people who actually consider art their business. To keep this from turning into an endless rabbit hole, I'll focus mostly on artists who work in a realistic or semi-realistic style. There are artists out there who have strong opinions about every product with endless collections of art supplies. They can talk at length about a watercolor palette, yet it's obvious they haven't used it much. And when they finally do make a painting, you can tell they haven't spent enough time studying drawing. And I know I preach about this a lot, but drawing is at the heart of everything. Drawing with the most basic pencil you have is what matters, not a fancy black wing. I obviously don't mind when someone sells their art, truly go for it, but I do start raising an eyebrow when those same people try to teach within their communities. Because let's be honest, having a crowd of people constantly telling you how talented you are feels great. It's easy to get swept up in that praise loop, and once that happens, your standards can drop without you even noticing. And the thing is, it's often the same artists who post endless hauls. They own so many supplies, they can't even remember what they have. Yet they reassure their audience, you don't need all this stuff, I'm just buying it because it's my job. YouTube demands it. Now that's convenient. From where I stand, it looks more like a coping mechanism. Buying becomes a way to fill an emotional gap. A way to feel busy, productive, inspired, and deep down you sense something isn't quite right. But it's comfortable. Money is comfortable. Opening new supplies is fun. But actually improving your craft, showing people how to push a single palette to its limits, now that takes effort. And maybe this triggers me because I used to do the exact same thing. I overcompensated my weak spots with products. Something always felt not enough, something always needed fixing. So I stayed in that preparation loop instead of creating. It's a trap and it's incredibly easy to fall into. And I'm sorry, but it still baffles me when artists with rooms full of supplies claim they use everything because it's their job. Really? We all have the same hours in a day, and almost none of us can dedicate full days to making art, let alone dozens of other crafts. You don't need mountains of sketchbooks or an endless rainbow of paints to be a working artist. Nobody does. And honestly, I wouldn't even care, except that these creators shape what becomes normal on YouTube. Their habits set trends. And then we all complain that cozy small channels don't get pushed while sponsored haul-heavy content does. But aren't we part of that cycle every time we jump onto another haul trend? I already know my channel will probably stay small and I've made peace with that. Many of you discovered me through those review style videos, and I'm grateful. And yes, a few companies reached out over the past year offering free products. They didn't require a review, but I still said no because I don't want my work to turn into yet another rainbow palette or 20 shades of yellow. Let's compare. So if that disappoints anyone, I'm sorry, but I'd rather focus on drawing, on the actual process, progress and learning. It's not flashy, it's not trendy, but it's real. And I'd rather be boring and honest than make wonky, poorly executed art and hide behind another pile of new supplies. Now, I really don't want to make too many comparisons or sound like I'm better than anyone else, but I've painted a lot over the past few years, even big formats, and I still have plenty of supplies barely touched. Basically, I have what you see behind me on my desk, plus a chest of drawers to my right with one of those movable cards. These artists who genuinely need large studios with lots of paint, assuming we're sticking to the realism or semi-realism niche I mentioned earlier, and that's because there's the whole, abstract art crowd, and I don't know what they're using and I don't want to go that path. Anyway, those artists are usually very skilled. They have an established workflow, know their favorite products, and use them deliberately because their goal is to paint, not to chase cheap or trendy supplies or to collect the most expensive limited editions. Okay, let's clear the air. Although products I didn't fall for. At the beginning of October, I went to Warsaw, my hometown, to visit my family, and I convinced my parents to go to this part of the city we hadn't been to in years. There's this cool art supply shop there that became really popular in Poland over the past few years. They've opened a few of them. And honestly, I was ready. I've been on my no-buy year for so long, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'll finally treat myself, make an art haul, maybe even a video out of it. Of course, I went straight to the watercolor section. I was thinking about buying some Roman Szmal paints. No-brainer. And I saw those gorgeous little palettes that so many artists had been raving about online. The peach-colored was one calling my name, and then all of a sudden it just felt pointless. I don't paint outdoors, and even if I did, I already have a few palettes. For the rare occasion I'd go outside, I could just take one of my larger ones with me. So yeah, I grabbed 3 colors because they look different from anything I already owned. A neutral tint acrylic ink and one Roman Szmal brush I'd been curious about, and that was it. I honestly thought I'd walk out with a big bag and that satisfying home moment. And the funny thing is, I didn't even feel disappointed. My priorities just shifted. I take much more pride in finishing products, in making a list of what's actually missing because I used it and loved it, rather than buying things just to have them or only to try them out. The next big thing I didn't fall for were the Caran Neocolor I and II, whatever. Oh gosh, okay. These are dangerous waters. When I was a kid, maybe until I was 13, I used to use something very similar called Bambino crayons. They were nowhere near the quality of Caran d'Ache, obviously, but they behave kind of the same way. They'd break if you press too hard. They were wrapped in that weird paper that got gross over time from your hands, but they did the job. And I'm sure some people do get great use out of Neocolors, but honestly, there are a lot of artists out there who have no idea what to do with them. They just watch them, call it a day, and never go further. Tell me what you're using them for in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious. I think to really get the most out of them, you'd need a specific style, something textured, maybe for children's books or expressive illustrations. Personally, I just don't see any use for the Neocolors. And when it comes to that Neocolor II series, when I already have a large range of Derwent Inktense pencils, sure, the effect might be slightly different, but I can't imagine how I'd implement in my work when I already have products that give me the same result, watercolors included. So for me, the whole fear of missing out moment was just one big no. And of course, once they became popular, they released an anniversary collection and everyone lost their minds again. Live and let live, I guess, but I don't know, man. And last but not least, I never fell for the Kuretake Gansai Tambi paints. I'm not a fan of their big pans, and I'm aware they have a different binder, so they behave differently than the Western style watercolors I'm used to. From what I've seen, they could be interesting given Japan's unique tradition in paint making. And obviously, I'm not judging anyone who enjoys them, but personally, I feel a bit underwhelmed. The same goes for Japanese gouache. Personally, I really enjoyed their acrylic gouache. It actually offers great coverage, that creamy consistency and the ability to blend into smooth gradients. But with regular gouache, I don't really see the need to invest in pricey imported brands. Most of the time, you can get great local options that perform just as well without the extra cost. When I think about the artists I admire, the ones whose works appear in many books, who are generally quite visible or who actually teach painting, their palettes are always messy and beaten up. I'm not saying they don't enjoy buying some nice, colorful paints now and then, but for them, it's simply a tool, something they use until they run out of. To wrap up this whole rant, I honestly wish you all well. At the end of the day, this community is full of people with a lot of sensitivity, and that's a beautiful thing. I really hope we all find a way to stay close to what we truly love in art without getting pulled into the overconsumption traps that are everywhere. Take care.